Welcome to the Racing Nuggets podcast. I'm TJ Noodleman, joined by my co-host, Mr. Dan Plan. Hey, Dan.
Hello.
How's retirement treating you?
It's going pretty good so far. I'm 2 days in, so just getting used to it.
Nice. Very nice. Another guy, it might seem like he is retired, but he's not. He's living his best life down in Florida. You know him from the La Crosse Fairgrounds Speedway as the announcer there and announcing at several other tracks across the area as well, too. Please welcome to the podcast, Dan Deicher. Hey, Dan.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, we thought we would get in touch with you for a couple of reasons. The first being, why did you move to Florida? That has been like the biggest question that everybody keeps asking. So I thought I'd give you an opportunity to answer it.
You know, it's kind of a two-faceted answer. The first one being that my wife, Julie, and I took a vacation down here. Rich Garbers, everybody knows from the Speedway, is Shorty, has lived down here since 2016. And with my schedule every single month out of the year, I've never really taken her on a good week-long vacation. So last year, Shorty and Anna said, hey, why don't you guys come down here? You let me stay in your camper all these Oktoberfest for free. We're going to give you our guest house for an entire week. And we thought, wow, that would be really phenomenal. So when we came down, it was about a year ago, last December, we celebrated my birthday in November, Julie's birthday in December, Thanksgiving and Christmas, and our 31st anniversary all in that week. And when we came down here to the Gulf of Mexico, it was just the most beautiful, quiet, serene. Back then they were breaking records. I think the entire week we were here, it was in the 90s, and it's normally like it is right now in the 70s. And we got here on a Sunday, and by that Tuesday, we were out on the lanai at Shorty's house, and I looked over at Julie and says, you know, I could live down here. I could seriously live down here. The weather and the beaches and you know, the cost of living is not like what people think it is. I said, I could live down here. And so her birthday was that Thursday. We went to Shorty's and he cooked out a prime rib. And I was already putting numbers in my head. And I was like, we're going to move down here. This time next year, we're going to celebrate your birthday here. And Julie's like, ha, ha, ha. Yeah, that's really going to happen. We went to Rich's on Saturday, the day before we went back to Wisconsin. And I told Rich, you know, if I made this much money down here, if I could latch onto a hotel someplace like I've done, we could actually live down here, not in Rotunda West, because this is incredible here. We're going to move down here. 2 days after we flew back to Wisconsin, we had 9 inches of snow. And I heard Julie swearing that morning. She was trying to dig my Jeep out of the driveway so I could go to work. And I had the snow plow. And she was swearing and swearing and swearing. I said, this is bleepity bleep the last time we are ever going to sit up here through a snow. I'm not doing this anymore. If it's like that down in Florida during December, I want to do this full time. So then, you know, a couple months went by and March rolled around and I started looking on Facebook Marketplace and I thought, okay, that house is $2 million. That one's 2.6. That one's only $1,500 a month. Wait a minute. So we really started looking around at some of the rentals, and we're in what's called Rotunda West, and we're 30 miles north of Fort Myers, and I work in Venice, and we're half an hour south of Venice. And the further away you live away from the Gulf, the rent was getting cheaper, and if you didn't have a pool, the rent was even cheaper. So we really got to looking into this and met a couple on Facebook that had a house for rent. And, you know, there was no way I could afford what they were offering, but we had a lot of connections of where I went to school and went to college and everything. And I turned them down in June. And then in July, after the July 4th, they wrote me back on Facebook and said, hey, how are things going? And I said, well, you know, we're getting along, middle of the racing season. Well, my husband and I love you and your wife so well. Can you do this? And I saw what she shot us back. And I'm like, calling Julie from like 5 rooms over in our house in West Salem. You might want to come read this. And then they took this off and they took this off and they took this off. And I thought, man, if I can get a job down there making this much money a year, we can actually go live comfortably. And we signed the deal in late July. Well, then it was, okay, I can't tell anybody because I don't, I'm going to finish the race season out at Tomah and Crosse and the radio we had going on. And it was the hardest thing in my life because I can't keep a secret to save my life. And we told, I think, 3 people. We told Go-Go Johnny Olson, Sean Knobloch, and we had told Billy Doc Niles and Paul Reichert because I knew this was Bill's last year at the track and radio way back in April. And September rolled around. I started looking at jobs down here, and I got the director of sales position at 2 brand new hotels in Venice and thought, okay, we can actually do this. So everything's signed, sealed, and delivered. I've got my mind set on Oktoberfest. We got 4 days coming up. Got to get the camper out. You know how that goes. Everything that goes behind fest. Here comes the hurricane. Now, Shorty's down here. Rich is down here, and he's feeding me reports that this thing is supposed to land up in Tampa Bay. Okay, it's going to be 75 miles north of our house. Well, as we get closer to Oktoberfest, Rich calls me and says, you really want to watch Wink News, and that's the news station in Fort Myers. This hurricane is going to go right through our neighborhood. I'm like, there's no way that can't happen. Everything that we worked on for the entire year to come down here is going to be gone. And sure enough, the hurricane hit, and I'm watching it in my camper. I'm watching it in the Fest Tower. Before the phone service went out, I was texting Rich back and forth. And here we are in the middle of one of the best racing weekends that anybody can ever go to. And my mind is not set on Oktoberfest. My mind is set on, I just paid for a house in Florida that's going to be gone. I got a job in 2 hotels that are high-rise hotels. They're going to be gone. What are we going to do? We're going to be out all this money. And I had already told Chuck Deary about a month prior, it was the night of destruction, that I wasn't going to be back next year. And that's when he had said he was retiring. So during the entire Oktoberfest race week, and I was in bed after the races were done. I didn't walk around. I didn't do anything. I was so worried that we weren't going to have a house. So the hurricane hits, and we finally get a hold of Rich Sunday morning of Fest. And he had just ventured out of his house. Well, when he went out of his house, his kid was canoeing up and down their road. It flooded so bad. And we're waiting and we're waiting. Well, he finally got, because I live about a mile from him, just right down my road here. And he got a chance to venture out, and he saw what the damage was. And my pool cage was completely ripped out of the ground. And I only had 2 holes in my garage ceiling, which everything was repaired by the time we moved down, except for the cage. Well, the Lord must have had his hand on my house and Rich's house, because the houses on both sides of our houses, the one next door here, he's a Canadian. They're gutting the entire inside, just put a new roof on. People over here from Oregon, they just got here 2 or 3 weeks ago. Their roof is done. Their lanai cage has been ripped out, and they're going to be gutting that house. So we were just so fortunate that we were able, after a year long of planning, we could make the trek down. And so we made it happen. The other thing that kind of got to me was back in July, after my granddaughter's birthday on July 4th, we were all sitting around, and I was really reflecting on, my kids and the family. And it really dawned on me that my wife has let me race announce every single weekend from pretty much April to October since 1992. She never complained about it. We never argued about it, because she knew it's something I wanted to do. Same thing with doing radio and TV stuff. She never complained, because she knew that this is what's going to make him happy. Then he's got his thing, and I'm going to do mine. And in July, before I signed the lease, I said, I'm going to give my wife 16 years back, because I was at La Crosse for 16 years. I'm old enough now that I can give her at least 16 years back of those weekends. And putting those 2 things together, voila, we're here.
That's amazing. That is amazing. You must miss the announcing, though, because you're going to be announcing again down there in Florida. And I will say this, I was down there obviously at 417 for the big Bill Bigley Memorial Race, we don't need to go into how all that turned out, but
Oh man,
I
tell you what,
I was
I-
at the race though, and I heard that you did live announcing of the race at the race, and that was all anybody was talking. I couldn't find the video, so I haven't seen it. But
I was Facebook living. Just it was the neatest thing because I ran into you and I'm like, man, I've known you forever, and I'm seeing her in the state of Florida at a racetrack. This is weird. And then I'm roaming through the pits, and we spent 6 hours in the pits. I don't get to do that on Saturdays because I'm on the other side. And I got to watch, I was by Ty, and I was by Derek, and I was by Gabe Summers, all three in a row. And Ross Chastain's brother. And I'm watching the mechanics that go into tire pressures and ripping apart back ends and the driver conversations and the dads talking to their sons. I had never experienced anything like that in my life. And it was so cool to be on the other side of the fence. So as we're standing down by, oh, goodness gracious, Michael Bilderback's family in the pits, they were like, hey, are you going to Facebook Live this at all? Because we've seen you do this from La Crosse in turn 3. So well, if my cell service works, and I did a little bit, then I did a little bit more. Well, then the race started, and Ty's right up front there. Derek's right up front there. I'm like, there's a lot of Wisconsin folks wondering what's going on down here. So instead of doing only 10 minutes, I ended up doing play-by-play of almost the entire race, and it was a long race. Just coming out of turn 2 down the back straightaway on the tires, and I did the entire race like it was pay-per-view, and it was like, La Crosse was, Vest was last week, and I need to do this. I'm supposed to be announcing another race, and I checked myself several times during cautions. I'm like, man, I retired from all this. I'm not doing this anymore, and I did the whole race. And I'll tell you, I've known you I think since 2005. And I couldn't have felt more hurt for you as you and I were standing down as they were tearing down Ty's car. And you and I talked earlier in the day, and I signed the flag for Nicole, which was way cool. And it was a great day. And just to watch the look on your face as you're watching your husband, Toby, and Ty, the connection you guys have had for so long. I told Shorty, I'm like, do I even go up and say anything to her? Because you were frozen. And I thought, I got to go up and say something to her. And that's when I said, I'm not asking as a media guy, what's going on? You're like, you looked right at me dead in the face today. And I don't know. I don't know. And I had to walk away, and I felt so bad for the way that the race turned out, and you standing there, and here's Ty coming off of what happened last year down here. And so I felt so bad for you having to stand there to watch that like that with the internals that you have.
Well, I felt worse for Tobe, honestly. I remember you asking me too. You said, is there anything to worry about? And I said very confidently at first, no,
right,
because Tobe's been through this drill, and he knows better than to do something in the gray area because it's too expensive of a mistake, So I was very confident at first. And then the longer it kept going on, and I know my husband well enough, and I was watching his face and reading his body language, and then I knew something ain't good. And I was standing next to Todd Nagel, and he had asked me, do you know what's going on? What's going on? I said, it ain't good. I think we got DQ'd. And then Tobe came around, and he slammed his fist on the front end of the fender. And that's when and then he stormed off down to the pits to get the trophy to bring it back. And that I knew then it was like, it wasn't good. That was rough. That's
when my heart sunk for Toby, was watching him take that humongous 12-foot trophy back down to where the tech shed area was. Because I've never seen Toby have a blank look on his face like that before. And people are hitting me up on social media left and right that night. Oh, what happened? Did he get caught cheating? And all, how that goes. As I tell you what, I wish I could bring each one of you down here to stare into the face of Toby, who sat on the back left rear well of Ty's car for at least 20 minutes with a blank look on his face, and to look at Ty sitting on the front bumper. Those were not looks of cheaters. Those were not looks of, however you want to put it. Those were looks of just sadness.
Yeah. Well, and Joe Wood was the tech guy. That was, some people were like, well, it's the Southerners don't want the Northerners to win. It's like, well, it was Northern tech people. So that's not the case. And again, if anyone's been living under a rock, it was one hollowed bolt. Toby was putting that together at night when nothing is open, needed one bolt yet, and he didn't have the right bolt. So he just used what he could find there to get it put together so they could move on to the next thing and get the car put back together. And he just never gave it a second thought. He meant to go back and replace it and he forgot to. So it's over and done with.
Like I said, like I first said, it's a hollow subject.
Yes.
And if I understand it correctly too, those bolts it's not a safety deal why they're not legal. It's a cost savings deal. And that's, still had them because they used to be legal up until a few years ago. So that's,
right.
I read all those things too, and you just got to roll your eyes sometimes.
I know people are, I think what it really comes down to is people enjoy, and you probably are used to seeing this too, Dan, over the years. People enjoy seeing a successful person fall. They just love that.
It's funny you bring that up because when I used to track announce at the Knoxville Speedway before I moved to Wisconsin, I was there in 97, 98, 99. They had a guy named Terry McCarl who eventually went on to run with the World of Outlaws and wasn't very successful. He would win every single feature, every single night. I moved here. I started announcing at La Crosse, and it's Steve Carlson every single night. As an announcer, you're cheering for him. I'm like, hey, if you want to bitch, get better. I would say that continuously. If you want to beat him, get better. And McCarl was the most hated man. I mean, you're sitting in front of 40,000 sprint car fans. You hop out to get the checkered flag, and you got 40,000 boos raining down on you. Steve went through that for many years. And then when Ty burst on the scene at La Crosse, everyone's like, oh, he's a newcomer. Hey, it's not Steve Carlson. So they started rooting for Ty. Watching that tide turn was something else because all of a sudden, Ty Majeski's a boo bird. Look what happened this past Oktoberfest when he won in Toby's 001 truck. I don't think I've ever heard the boos come more louder against Ty Majeski. But you're exactly right. Everybody wants the winner to fail.
Yeah. And the thing is, honestly, if you've heard the quote from Kyle Busch, he's like, I don't care as long as they're making noise.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's right. All right. That's all right. It's putting people in the stands too.
When you were announcing in Knoxville, did you actually live right in the town of Knoxville then?
Yeah, it was the neatest thing is I was doing radio at KNIA, which was 5 blocks from the Speedway. The house we were renting was 2 blocks away from the Speedway. It's actually almost right across the street at the kitty corner, go right into the parking lot. And during the first Knoxville Nationals, I didn't know what to expect. It's a town of 10,000 people that turns into 120,000 over a week. Well, my wife started hearing Julie's never been a big race fan ever. And she started hearing from the neighbors, oh, yeah, you better be prepared for this week because you can't drive anywhere. You can't walk. The stores are full. She actually packed up both my daughters and went back to Illinois for the entire week because she didn't want to deal with that. And it was just my son, Ryan, and I for the entirety of the Nationals. And the radio station bought me a golf cart that Steve Kinsler and Kerry Kinsler stole from me at a Wednesday night. I got it back the next morning because I used to do a radio show at the Hy-Vee across the street. And when they brought my golf cart back, they put knobby tires on it and they had built a wing on my golf cart. So, yeah, so I used to take the golf cart at 5 o'clock in the morning to the radio station. And then I would take that just down the road to the racetrack, do my thing there, and then take it right back home.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's that. Oktoberfest to me is an experience, as you know, and as Jackie does. But if you ever get a chance to go to the Knoxville Nationals, and you got this little town of 10,000, which doesn't have much, and sit there for a week, holy cow!
Yeah, wow. I made my first trip down there this summer, and we pulled into town Tuesday night, and that's one of the things you realize at big events like that. I'm sure the cell service 51 weeks a year works perfectly fine in Knoxville for 10,000 people, but then by Thursday night, it's it's pretty slow trying to do stuff with cell service down there. And it is amazing to see. We stayed like maybe a mile away, the last little farmland left in town. It's called Kading Corner. You just park right in their yard, and they gave us electricity from the garage, and
Wow.
crazy.
That was one of the neatest things. So Julie comes back because she was from Central Illinois, and she came back on a Monday after the Nationals were done, and I had $3,500 in cash, ones, 5, 10s, 20s in my hand, and I laid it across.
Were you stripping?
No, I didn't have any time. I laid it across a big fan on my kitchen table, and her and the girls walk in, and they're starting to get settled. And she's like, calls me into the living room, Dan, what is all this money? I'm like, you wouldn't believe me if I told you, let's put it in the bank. She said, what did you do?
And what did you do?
I said, I rented the yard. And she says, what does that mean? I said, nobody told us that during Nationals, people will come with tents. They'll knock on your door the closer you are to the racetrack. And like at Lambeau Field, you're paying $20 to park in somebody's yard. I had 19 tents and a motorhome in my driveway that they paid me to stay there from that Monday night until Sunday. Were paying me cash money to camp on the side of my yard, the back of my yard, the other side, in a full-fledged motorhome that took up my entire driveway, plugged into my garage. I made $3,500 off that.
Yeah.
That's incredible. How long were you down there, Dan? How long were you in that Knoxville area?
I started doing radio there in 97, and then we moved to Wisconsin in 2001. And I was at Knoxville. The first 2 years, I was doing the play-by-play on the radio for the local radio station. And my little booth area was the 4th floor of the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame. On the front stretch side is where you've got the actual announcers booths and the PR and all that stuff. Where we were was in the corner of turn 2. And if you ever look at Knoxville and how it's laid out, it's before you get to the grandstand area, there's a big section of VIPs and places to watch the race. We were on the top floor of the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame in this little tiny room. It was me and a guy named Eric Beatles. It was Eric the Brain Beatles. And he was probably in his early 70s, but he'd grown up around that racetrack. And back at the time, he was married to Ralph Capitani's youngest daughter, because Ralph used to be the longtime owner and promoter of the Knoxville Speedway. So he did the radio show with me. And we were up in this little closet area doing the radio play-by-play. And then in 99, their regular announcer got hooked up at that time. I'm thinking it was still the Pikes Peak International Speedway in Colorado Springs. And that's where we had just came from, because I had announced a Busch race at Pikes Peak International Speedway in 96. And actually then announced from 4,000 feet up on top of Pikes Peak for the International Hill Climb race that they do. And so he was getting a job there, and they're like, hey, can you do radio and announce at the same time? I said, there's no way I can do that. So I had a radio show that I did before the races on Saturday at High V. And then I had another one I did it right after qualifying, right outside the winner's circle. And then I would hustle back up in the tower. And actually, I called the races for that entire year.
No.
Cool.
Got some others.
Oops, I'm sorry. What was the very first track that you actually did race announcing?
1992 in Parker, Arizona. It was a 28.6 mile track. And you're going, no, wait a minute, how's that configured? It was my second ever radio job, and we moved from Illinois to Arizona. And our head sales gal's husband was the promoter for Baja Racing. And they had a huge Baja event that stretched over 4 days. That was a hot summer there. Wow. And they didn't have anybody to announce it. Their guy I think there was some marital things. Excuse me. Their announcer packed up and left his wife.
Oh.
And he said, well, Dan, you're our news and sports guy. Come on out and do some Baja announcing with me. I'm like, is that like funny cars? He's like, no, these are like the dune buggies. I thought, oh man, those have got to be cool. So a little fanboy kid in me comes out, not realizing that you're not sitting in a central location for Baja. There is no tower. You're actually in a buggy with a huge headset on and multiple radios around you, and you're going around the course telling what everyone's doing. I lost about 40 pounds in 4 days because I had never experienced heat like that before. Was sunburnt like there was no tomorrow. And I thought that was the neatest thing to do. So then we moved to Taylorville. And the second race I ever did was at a mile dirt fairgrounds track for go-karts. And I thought, wow, this is going to be, $100 to do go-karts. Wow, this isn't going to be too much fun because they only go, 25, 30 mile an hour. They set my table up on the front straightaway right off the track. And again, this is a dirt track. Right after qualifying, I'm coated in mud. So I'm like, I'm going home. I don't want to do this anymore. So they moved my table back and gave me an umbrella to put over my table. These go-karts were doing like 106, 107, 110. And I was hooked. 1994, I was completely hooked that I want to be a race announcer because the adrenaline and the screaming and just the excitement around doing that, that was it. That was it right there.
So was that your first, then the go-kart, was that your first like long-term announcing gig?
Yeah, I did the entire season at the fairgrounds. And then we moved to, we were in Arizona, and then we moved to Nebraska, Scotts Bluff, Nebraska for my next radio gig. And they had a place called the Gearing Speedway. And it's set up somewhat like Tomah, but it's somewhat, back then it was really high banks. So it was really kind of strange. And they didn't have an announcer for their first two races. And they said, I was the sports director. Would you come announce these races? That was not good. I couldn't follow numbers. I didn't know any names. And you know what I used to do? I learned this a long time ago, is when you watch a start finish line, that's where you have to call a race. You can't call two cars coming out of turn 4 and watching them because your eyes can't freeze frame on the finish line. That night I blew 4 races because there was a lot of side-by-side racing going on. And I was calling the wrong winners. And I thought I was getting beat up afterwards. So the next week I was my first time ever driving. And they had a celebrity thing with the local radio and TV guys against former track champions and what they called bombers. And I was in a 69 Chevelle. And I drove and controlled the brake, but my passenger, who was the track champion in that car the year before, he had the gas pedal. Like, oh man, how is this going to work? And we're starting and stopping up and down up Fred straightaway because I kept hitting the brakes. I didn't know what was going on. We get ready to do our heat race, and I'm coming out of turn 2, and the track kept going because my visor was real fuzzy and dirty. I went off the track down the back pit road, and I almost hit the street sweeper. Oh. Slam the brakes on there. Well, I wore out one of his brake pads broke off. So we had to go back in the pits, and I'm sitting there all strapped in, sweating and nervous. And I actually went out and so we won the race. And he was telling me how to steer, and he knew how to get in and out of the corners and the throttle. So we beat the track champion, who was in a 77 Pontiac, and a guy from the TV station, and he wanted to fight me afterwards. Oh, you're a big media star. Now you come out and think you're a big race car driver. I'm like, he was only like 5'4", 5'5", and I'm like 6'8", 250. I'm like, I don't know what your beef is, man. I said, I didn't even want to do this race. I'd never driven race cars. I didn't want to do it. And they were like, well, we need one guy to do it. I said, so, if you want to go, we're going to go, but it's going to be for the dumbest reason ever.
Funny. So was that the only time you've ever gotten behind the wheel, or have you raced before? Or even since then?
Let's see. So we moved to Wisconsin in 2000. It was either 2002 or 2003. I was part-time announcing at the 141 Speedway when Matt Rowe owned it. And Daryl Dodd, who's a big sprint car guy out of Wilmot, had came to the radio station one day and said, hey, I heard you doing some announcing where we want to open up the Manitowoc Expo Speedway, which was the fairgrounds, half-mile dirt. And okay, well, we're going to have IMCA mods, sportsman stocks, midgets, which were like Hornet type cars, and the Wilmot sprint cars. Well, I grew up in Plymouth, Wisconsin, and I remember going to sprint car races way back in like 1972, 73. So I was always a huge dirt sprint car guy. And I thought, if I can take a chance to announce sprints, let's do this. So we opened up the track, and they had a media race one night. This was my first time on dirt, and that was a very, very, very rocky racetrack. I mean, there were just clumps of rocks in there. So what you had to do, I think there were 6 of us, and it was myself and some radio people and a TV guy, and I think the other guy was from the newspaper. We had 6 Hornet cars. I had a 93 Cavalier, all in one row in the front straight. Well, it was a pie eating contest to start with. You had your hands behind.
Right up your alley. That is right up your alley.
So we had our hands behind. I've got a picture of this somewhere in my house of me bending over the front of the car eating this banana cream pie. They didn't know what my eating habits were, because 4 weeks earlier, I had won the 2002 broad eating contest at Johnsonville at the Sheboygan County Fair. Had 19 broads in 7.5 minutes. So I'm on this car, and I demolish this banana cream pie, and the gal that was next to me, I'm kind of a smart ass. I'm like, oh, she's not even halfway through the pie. I jumped over, ate the rest of hers. Then I got it, because when you were done, you had to get in your car and race 5 laps. So I eat her pie. I jump in my car. I think I was like the 3rd or 4th one to actually start racing. And I learned early on that when you are in a race car that has an operable stereo and you're sliding out of the corners, you don't try to adjust the stereo, because it just doesn't work like that. And I ended up sideways on 5 laps, maybe 8 or 9 times. I was not in the right frame of mind after I was trying. I think I might have had the Bee Gees or something on, and just threw me out of whack. So that would have been my 2nd time racing. Back in, I don't know if it was 2011 or 2012, when I started announcing at Mississippi Thunder Speedway. John Radke had just won the track championship at La Crosse in his Hornet. And he was in, a bunch of guys were like, hey, we helped open the Hornet class back up at MTS. And John was racing up there with some other guys, and he calls me to his shop one day, my son and I, and here sits this blue 4-door Honda. And I'm like, okay, well, it looks like you're going to race a 4-door this year. He goes, no, you are. I'm like, are you serious? He goes, you and Dan Bailey, the full-time announcer at MTS. We're going to call it the Dan and Dan Show. Okay, this is going to be cool. So the plan was that we were only going to race every other weekend in the Hornet division. Well, Dan didn't want to do it. He's a dirt motorcycle guy, and he didn't want to leave the tower. So I ended up racing the first 5 races. And then my son took over the next 2 races. He blew 8 tires in 2 weeks and decided he was never racing again, which was odd. And I thought that was so cool on a dirt track. I mean, you're doing top speed, flying into the corners against people that are, a lot crazier and more experienced than you are. So we get done at the end of the night, and I'm leaving the racetrack. I'm like, hey, Deicher, you got a check. I'm like, I already got it paid for announcing. Well, no, you have a race check. And I actually got $58 that night to race. Thought, man, this is cool. I'm the announcer here. I'm getting paid to announce in a different guy's car, and I'm walking out with $58, and I didn't even pay an entry fee.
That's wild. So every time you moved with radio, did you seek out a racetrack, or did it just happen organically? How did that all work every time you moved?
I think I was really hooked once we were in Colorado Springs. I couldn't tell you. I was trying to think the other day who I was announcing next to. It was a spur of the moment thing. There was a bush race going on. Oh goodness, the trucks, Craftsman trucks were there. Greg Biffle won the truck race that day. And that morning, there was some flights that weren't coming in, and they were calling my house. I'm like, Julie's like, why does this racetrack keep calling you? I'm like, I don't know. We need you to help announce the race today. Here's what you need to do. We're going to get you, just get to the racetrack. Oh, this is going to be cool, because this is a big time track. So they get me in, they get me the VIP. We go up in the tower. They're introducing me to the stack guy and this stack guy, and just everybody that's involved in a race like that. And a guy named Dan McKinnon was doing the actual play-by-play, and I was doing the color. Well, I had did play-by-play in sports radio for a year, so I really wasn't used to color. And there were times he'd have to cut me off because I was talking too much. And then during commercial breaks, he'd say, all right, now listen, you're really stepping into the beefy parts of doing a race. You need to backpedal a little bit. Well, I took that as some criticism, and I'm like, screw you, man. Nobody tells me how to do radio, so I just did my own thing. And you could tell that there was an ego pounding going on in the tower. And I get done, and the promoter of the Pikes Peak International Raceway was giving me kudos, giving me a check for $1,000 and a t-shirt, which I thought was pretty cool. Well, then we got to stand on pit road for the truck race, and Greg Biffle wins, and he's on the front straightaway doing Bernies. And all of a sudden, as his crew is going out there to congratulate him, I'm going out there with them with a handheld radio. I'm like, oh, I don't even know who this guy is. So I interviewed Greg Biffle right there on the front straightaway, and he signs a hat for me, signs a program, and I knew right then and there, whatever happens for the rest of my life, I want to be involved in race announcing or PR or something, because this is just cool.
That is cool. That's very cool. And now here you are down in Florida. You're not working in radio, and yet you have landed a gig announcing, and it's coming up. Now we're recording this probably about 2 weeks out. So it's going to be airing. This show will drop on January 31st, and you're going to be announcing that first weekend of February. Tell everybody about what you're doing.
Well, I wonder if I should close the door behind me, because I knew what my wife's reaction was when she first found out. She's not too happy, but she's going to let me do it. We went to the 147 Speedway and had a great time, and the Facebook Live was really cool. But I just, I didn't want to do it anymore. That's long Saturdays. Now down here, we don't know anybody but Rich and his wife and my wife and I, and that's how it was going to be. I knew that this race was going on at the Freedom Factory up in Bradenton, which is about 45 miles from me north. And the only reason I was really paying attention is because the Midwest Dash Series is going to be there. And I was the voice of the Midwest Dash Series for 9 or 10 years, back when I was doing Great Northern, when Greg Oliver owned it. And then he sells it, and then Drew Jack buys it, and then he says, hey, would you, if you get a chance, come around and still do our races, since I knew all the guys. I said, okay. Well, about a week ago, I got a text message out of the blue. I'm sitting out here getting ready to go in a pool from Drew Jack. Hey, Dan, how would you like to announce that race on February 3rd at the Freedom Factory? And it took me about 5 seconds to go, yes. And Julie's sitting here and goes, wait, what did you just say? Oh, man, I'm not back in the Crosse. So Drew texts me back, and he says, oh, wait, it's February 4th. It's on a Saturday. And he says, you're going to be announcing with Cletus McFarland. Well, you're going to be the primary announcer from not only Midwest Dash, but the other 3, or I think there's maybe 4 other series that are there. And then you're going to be doing some announcing with Cletus McFarland. I'm like, wait a minute, Cletus McFarland, how does he fit into this? And so we talked for a little bit. I'm just like, let me know the time and place of where to go. And he said, we couldn't have found it. It's just the timing of me being here, and then those guys racing here, and it's primarily the entire bunch I just had at Oktoberfest are going to be, George Sparkman was the very first one to sign up. And I said, okay, well, what else am I doing? And their Florida mini mods, they have a Crown Vic class down here. It's nothing but Crown Victorias.
Dang, that's like Undercover Cop.
Yeah, some of them look like cop cars too. Billy Niles should be pretty impressed, because a couple of them are doctored up like cop cars. So when I get there, I'm going to show them the original picture of the 54 and tell them they're not doing it right. but they've got their mini mods down here are actual like Pinto late models. Rich Garbers and I were just looking at pictures of these things the other day. They're Mustangs and they're Pintos, and there's a couple of Pontiac Firebirds. There's about 20 or 30 of these things with huge waving hood scoops, and I think they're on 15-inch tires. I mean, this is a really, or 8-inch Bassett tires with 15-inch rims, or however that's came. Just a weird assortment of cars. Well, they just broke, I think, 125 cars total last week, and they're expecting 150. Well, then they did a podcast the other night, or a live Facebook the other night, and Cletus calls me. I'm like, oh, man, this is cool. I'm playing fanboy talking to you. He says, you're the guy from Oktoberfest. I said, how would you know that? He says, well, I've been to 2 Oktoberfests in the past. He goes, did I ever see a picture of you with a horse's head on your head? I thought, oh, man.
Yep. Did you own that? Did you own that?
Yeah, that was, and I threw Matt Pannier under the bus because we were down at the Pink Flamingo one night, just totally getting it on. And they had me on the microphone. I turned around and Pannier puts a horse head on me. So I'm dancing with a horse head on my head. Because I remember seeing that picture. I'm like, oh, this is a great first impression. This guy's going to announce my track. And so he's like, well, here's how we're going to do this. He's actually now, if you ever follow Cletus McFarland, this guy's like the biggest street drag 10,000 horsepower machines. How fast can I make it go and make it blow up? And that's really why he bought the Freedom Factory, because it was a closed racetrack and he wanted a place to play with his toys. And there was so much interest all over this side of the state, they wanted to race there now. And he said he's going to try to race his sportsman car. Intermission, he's bringing out, we've seen drifters at the La Crosse Speedway. These are the pros that are coming, they've got the big motors and they know exactly how to drift, and they're doing street burnouts and whatever else he's going to do at intermission. So he says, well, come on down the track and I'll take the mic from you there and I'm going to do some announcements and then he's going to go back to race. And I thought out of all the people, I was always honored to announce for someone like Chuck Deary, because I had heard of Chuck's name back when I was in Manitowoc, 8 years before I was even, thought of it, the La Crosse Speedway. And then Hugh Deary, I remember Hugh Deary's name from back in the day, and Steve Carlson's name used to get kicked around in Manitowoc all the time. So to be able to announce for a guy like Cletus McFarland to work at his racetrack is just going to be phenomenal. It's just, there's the goosebumps there again. I'm getting the La Crosse Speedway, Tomah Speedway goosebumps again.
That's awesome. That is awesome. So it is just a one-off, but it is a pretty cool deal that there's a nice Midwest flavor to it.
Now I hear my wife in the background saying it better be a one-off. In my head, I'm going, I wonder if they want me full-time up there now.
Oh, shoot.
But, it's funny. Just before I came on, somebody posted something on Facebook today. It was for a racer that once you get racing in your blood, it stays with you forever or something like that. It was a meme that was out there. And I just showed Julie that before we started coming on the Zoom today. I'm like, this is so true when it comes to announcers and newspaper writers and anybody that does the things like Dan's done with that fantastic Midwest Racing Connection. When I first started, Jackie had the radio show going on, that was the first one I'd ever seen at a racetrack in my entire life, where they actually did it live from the racetrack. And then they have Bruce down in the pitch doing his thing. But it's true, is it doesn't matter what facet of racing you're in. Once you're in it, man, you're in it for life.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. Here we are doing a podcast about racing.
Yeah, I'm supposed to be retired again.
Well, Dan, you have a question yet?
I was just thinking, I know back when you were announcing at 141 in Manitowoc, did you live in the Manitowoc area then?
Yeah, we lived in Two Rivers.
Did you ever get a chance to go to Avery Auto Salvage?
You're not going to believe this. I covered the Avery trial of him and Brendan Dassey.
Okay.
If you got time, I can just really give you a quick synopsis here. I was coaching girls basketball in Michigan, which is just north of Two Rivers. Actually, it's between Francis Creek and Two Rivers. And on a Saturday afternoon, I had the radio station van and my son. We were coming out of a YMCA basketball coaches meeting. So I get to the car, and I had a flip phone back then. And I had all these voicemails. I'm like, oh, what's going on here? And there was one from the sheriff's department, state patrol, from the radio station owner. You've got to get to this place called Avery's Auto Salvage right now. Something big's going down. Okay, well, we're going to head down there and see what's going on. I'm in a running suit gym outfit, and it was freezing rain that night. And so we were just going to go home. We sat out there at the Avery Auto Salvage corner for 4.5 hours as nighttime was coming on. And the sheriff's department and state patrol were giving us little updates that they were searching the property. Well, we had a Marty system back then installed in our radio station van that I would dial 3 numbers, knock the transmitter off, and go live. So I'm live broadcasting. Well, then I'm getting hungry, and then I'm getting cold, and people were bringing me donuts and hot chocolate because they knew my son was there. We see flashlights going on, throughout the distance, and we're not knowing what's going on. Well, boom, they arrest Stephen Avery for the horrific crime that he had committed. I had just met him at a gas station 2 weeks earlier with my older brother, and he was filling up a camper. And I actually walked over to the parking lot and said, "Hey, are you Stephen Avery?" He said, "Well, yeah, I am." I said, "Man, congratulations. You got out of prison after serving all those years for doing nothing wrong." Not knowing 2 weeks later, I'm at his house while they're scoping it. So I sat through and covered the entire Avery trial and the Brendan Dassey trial. Then I moved to Sparta when I started in radio here. Was it last year or the year before that Avery documentary came out? And I had somebody, and I refused to watch it because I was there. I mean, I knew the facts. I read everything. I saw everything. I knew what was going on. And you get people, wherever they live, that automatically thought he was a scumbag and he's guilty and all this other good stuff. And he's not guilty. And it was a setup. Somebody texted me one night and said, "Deicher, did you ever live in Manitowoc?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I did radio there." Did you know Stephen Avery? And I said, "Well, I didn't know him. I covered his trial." He said, "Did you know that you're in the documentary?" I said, "You've got to be kidding me. There's no way I'm in that documentary." Then he sent me a video clip of it. And there it was. It was the first official press conference that was held in the town hall, this little tiny town hall. And as you hear people firing off questions to the sheriff, you can hear me plainly say, "I'm Dan Deicher with Cub Radio." And I asked him a series of questions. And they put that in the documentary as part of the whole show. And I'm like, what are the chances that would ever be?
Wow.
Yeah. And my wife, after she found that out, because then people were tagging me on Facebook and they were putting the video clip. We know this guy. This is Dan Deicher. He's a reporter. He was asking the sheriff questions. Well, then it got out of hand. And Julie will never really defend anything on Facebook because she doesn't like social media until they're turning it towards me. I'm sure, Jackie, you've done this with Ty for many years. Yeah. Julie did this when they were attacking me about Stephen Avery. And what side is he on? And what side is he on with Brendan Dassey? Well, then they want to make it political. And it was really ridiculous. I just fired off some questions. I didn't play a side. And now it's this he said, she said on Facebook thing. And it was just, for people that don't even know Stephen Avery or aren't even from the state of Wisconsin that followed it, it was just crazy.
Yeah. That is crazy. Do you think Brendan Dassey was involved? Or do you think he was just sort of?
No, I have a feeling that Brendan Dassey was there. He was forced to be there. He was dropped off from school in the little cul-de-sac. His trailer on this property that Avery's had, there were like 5 family houses on it. It's just humongous. Brendan Dassey got dropped off at his mailbox in the cul-de-sac as Stephen Avery was coming down and called him up into his house. Well, by this time, Teresa Hallback was already inside the house and she was already attached, fixated to the bed. I have a strong feeling that Avery made him watch and partake in that horrific crime that took place with the threats of, "I'm going to beat you up," or "I'm going to tell your mom and dad," because Brendan Dassey was not here. You can tell I talked to him out in the hallway several times at the courthouse. He didn't come with a full toolbox.
No, I think he was, yeah. I'm glad to hear you say that because I really was not that involved with knowing the whole case. I just know that kid, Brandon, really wanted to get home and watch WrestleMania.
Yeah,
I had
and
no clue what was going on.
if you watch, I've watched the first interrogation that they did with him, and how crooked the cops were, the sheriff's department investigators were, in knowing that they had a young kid right here. We're going to play the he said, she said cop, good, bad cop. You want a donut? Tell us what's going on. I mean, they got inside his head so bad that you could see it even during the trial, that his lawyers tried to prep him, and he was shaken. He was shaken. He didn't know what was going on. I don't even think half the time he knew what the day of the week was. And I'm not slamming Brandon Dassey's mental state by any means. So people that are watching this, don't get me wrong. And I'm not a psychologist, but just watching the transformation of Brandon Dassey shrunk him down till he was a little kid.
Yeah.
And, Stephen Avery, I'll say it a million times, he did that. He did that. There was no hidden key and all the others. He did that. Brandon Dassey does not need to be locked up. He needed to be in Mendota, a mental health facility where he could have gone to school, got into a nice structure. The whole family was not, if you just seen how they were in court, it was like a 3-ring circus half the time. He needed some structure and needed some guidance in life. And he may have turned out to be a good individual. He does not need to be locked up.
Yeah, I feel bad for him. I really
Yeah.
do.
And his mom, I mean, there were several times I would talk to his mom in the hallway in between sessions, and she was the sweetest person. And you could tell that she held Brandon so close to her heart, didn't know what was going on. And she refused to listen to the radio because we were talking bad about her kid. And she didn't really understand we're getting paid to do a job. Stephen Avery's mom and dad, that was a whole different story. I mean, the stare downs we'd have in the courtroom, in the hallway, it was like there was a fight about to happen.
Dang.
That was a different couple there. I tell you what.
Oof. Well, you
Yeah.
have had an incredible career and have been a real staple in the Midwest area. So it's really cool, Dan, that you are going to be involved in another race that has some Midwest flavor to it
Yep.
down in Florida. So good luck to you with everything that you do.
I appreciate it. And again, I got to thank Dan Plan. He popped on the radio show, I think about 4 or 5 years ago. And we did a trade out where he took our logo and put it in the Midwest Race Connection. And I'll say to this day that every single Saturday that I would pull up to the racetrack at 3:00 in the afternoon, the first thing I would do before I went up to the tower was I grabbed his newspaper out of that little rack that's right next to the pit window. I did it every single weekend. And I would have it laying up there. I would go through, I would take it in the pits and say, Harley Jankowski, did you see that Dan Plan's got a color picture? I'm not in his paper. It's right here.
I actually took a picture one time when I was walking by the tower because I could see you had the paper sitting right by the window there. So I had to take a picture of my paper in your office.
I was
I
always
did.
going to send you a picture of Toby reading it on the toilet, but I didn't know how well that would go over. Well, we really appreciate you taking part in the Racing Nuggets podcast. God bless you, man. Good luck on your adventures
you.
down there, and give your wife a squeeze for us.
I sure will. And if she pushes me in the pool for knowing, then I want to announce a little bit more.
Right. Take
Yes,
care,
have a
Dan.
good night. Thank you.
Dan.
Bye-bye.
Bye.